Genesis chapter 12.
Alex. My brother is a believer, a strong believer, and so is his wife, so that's.
Fantastic. Genesis chapter 12. Well, if we were to look real hard at the book of Genesis, you will notice it breaks down pretty well in two distinct sections. Genesis 1 through 11 really looks at the history of the world. You see the beginning of creation. You see marriage, language, culture. You have these concepts that kind of are the backdrop for everything that we know and see and have today. And then you get to chapter 12 through chapter 50, the story gets far more narrow than it was before. It really focuses on one man and his family and in the plan that God is using to bring redemption through them. So chapter 12 is the beginning of that, and we're going to be talking about Abraham, or Abram at this point, and his posterity to come. So, verse 1, of course it's the day when everybody's eating. So let's start with Tyler, because you're not eating. And we'll move down that way and come back around, just so everybody knows. Verse 1.
Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee.
All right. So, Abram is told to get out of his country, out of his kindred, out of his father's house, to a land that God would show him. And he's told to go basically away from his family. He's supposed to go, just him, his wife, his possessions, and take off. Does he do this? No, he does go, but he does not go necessarily the way he was supposed to. Abram, who would be going to the land of Canaan, was not yet in the land of Haran, even though the end of chapter 11 talks about his dad dying in Haran. You have to also understand that you see the genealogy there, that Abram was 70 when his dad had him. Or Abram's dad was 70 when he had Abram. I'm sorry. That would have been weird. You know, I made a joke the other day about Goliath's mom having a hard time because him and all his brothers were giants. But imagine if you had somebody at 70 years old. I mean, that's not going any better. So it's definitely worse. Anyway.
I worked in a daycare, believe me. At 60 years old, working with a toddler is not fun. They have too much energy.
I believe that. Anyhow, we find from Acts chapter 7 that he was actually still in Ur of the Chaldees when he was called. So, Acts 7, 2 through 4, it says, And he said, Men and brethren, fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he dealt in Haran, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Haran, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed unto him in his land wherein ye now dwell. So you have that going on. He started in Ur of the Chaldees, which we know from what was told about Terah and how he had left that place to go to Haran. But apparently that had happened after or at the time frame when Abram was given this commission to go. And he stayed there seemingly for a little while. Verse 2.
And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing.
So I was talking with Tyler this morning, and we were just kind of gabbing about the topic, and he pointed out something really fun. When you look at chapter 11 and what they were trying to do, they were looking at how they wanted to be a name that was reverenced, a great nation, all these things. They wanted to be this, and instead of them doing it God's way, they didn't follow what God said. Now God is now giving this to Abram instead, which I thought was a really cool addition. I probably should just let you say that. I don't know why I did that. I'm sorry. But it's really interesting that it worked that way. says he will bless you and make your name great. Go ahead and read verse 3.
And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
All right, so you see obviously the promise made to Abraham would be that of a line of posterity, a nation, and blessings instead of cursings. This I thought was a really cool tidbit that came from Barnhouse. It says, historically speaking, nations that have treated the Jewish people well have often been blessed. When the Greeks overran Palestine and desecrated the altar of the Jewish temple, they were soon to be conquered by Rome. When Rome killed Paul and many others and destroyed Jerusalem under Titus, Rome soon fell. Spain was reduced to a fifth-rate nation after the Inquisition of the Jews. Poland fell after the pogroms. Hitler's Germany went down after the orgies of anti-Semitism. And Britain lost her empire when she broke her faith with Israel. So I thought that was a really interesting setup. Now, God does at times allow Israel to definitely come under some judgment and condemnation from other countries, but he generally will judge them afterwards. You see this in the case of like the Assyrians and the Babylonians and things like that as well.
Yeah, I pray frequently that the United States stays friendly with Israel, because I don't want anything to, like we just showed, people that came down against Israel paid and, paid the price.
This verse 3 actually references back when he says all the families of the earth to be blessed. What do you think that references back to? Or forward to? To Christ. Yeah, which, when I say back to, I'm thinking the Genesis 3 promise. But you obviously see there is a reference that God will bless the world, and obviously we can see that happen through the person of Jesus Christ. It's interesting to note he doesn't intend to only bless Abram, though, or Abraham, which is what I think I wrote there, because it's hard for me to make that switch. That random chapter line where he becomes Abraham is
It's like
lost
Jacob
on me.
becoming Israel. I mean, it's a little confusing.
Yeah. So, this is not just salvation of Jews, but Gentiles also. And go figure, God would make a stranger of Abraham, and then one day bring strangers into his own fold. Yes, sir.
And it's not just in salvation that all the families of the earth are blessed through Jews. Interesting fact, over half of all Nobel Prize winners are Jewish.
Hollywood's run by Jews.
That's right. But so we're blessed in science and technology. We're blessed in medicine, particularly.
Yeah.
Literature, a lot of different areas, and those blessings oftentimes come through the Jewish people, even today in their diminished state, shall we say,
Yeah,
awaiting their Messiah.
that's good. So Abram, verse 4.
So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran.
All right, so Abram took off from Haran when he was 75. Now, even still, he has Lot with him. He's left his dad. He's out of his dad's household, but he still has his nephew. It's interesting in the beginning how gracious God is with people who don't follow exactly what he says, and later he comes down much harder when people don't follow his rules very specifically. At this point, there is no general law given, though, and we talked about how in the New Testament it says that when you have a law, things are basically judged by the law, and then you have more, how do you say that? You have more punishment because a law is enacted, if that makes sense. And so because there's not yet this law given, although they have some of it written on their hearts, which we'll see here shortly, there are things that they are not treated as, how do you say that? Harshly sometimes, or as strictly as some of the other people later. Harsh is probably not the right word. Strict is probably
Fairly?
better. Huh?
Fairly?
Yeah, sure. They're given a lot of blessing. We read verse 4. So I gotta.
Why do you have the note there, Lot was not supposed to be with Abraham?
Well, because God told him to get away from his family. In the first couple verses, he said, "Get away from thy country and thy kindred."
Kindred, which could be a much larger group
Yeah.
than his dad and his
Right.
brother's
Immediate
minor son.
Right.
So it's questionable, at least, exactly what's meant there. Doesn't it didn't work out real well for Lot. You could say in hindsight.
Do we know that?
Well, I would say at the very least, people who stayed in proximity to Abraham at least were somewhat blessed for a length of time, but God, I think, supernaturally moved them apart in the blessing of both of them. So I think that was his intentional plan, was for them to be apart. But in the meantime, God allows it. He doesn't come down on him for it, but he does definitely make sure they are separated. And he does it through them both receiving lots of animals. Yeah.
I'll wait.
Go ahead.
No, it's like God saying, I will wait.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, when you do what I tell you to do, now I will bless you.
Right. And it should be noted, he waits a while to receive the rest of this promise, and some of it may be that he hadn't fulfilled all of what he was told to do yet. And now that's probably not the only thing that held up the promise, but he had not followed the directions in total, and although God blessed him along the way, he still had more he was ought to have done.
Hardly anybody followed any. I read that. I read the book and went, whoa. He just didn't come down on anyone. So eventually it's going to hit the fan.
Well, you can't say he didn't come down on anyone when
Well,
3
yeah.
chapters ago the
Yeah.
whole world flooded, so. Yeah, that might count. But I get you, yeah. In this point, with the early patriarchs, they did a lot of things that you'd be like, that was pretty sketchy.
And the women too.
Yeah,
Huh.
This whole subject illustrates the idea of progressive revelation too, because when he told Abram what to do, he said, "Leave your kindred." Okay, so he left his uncles and his cousins and all of his extended family. He left his clan, but he took along. His dad went with him.
hmm
Don't know why he did, but his dad went with him. Lot went with him, and gradually God stripped away all those other things and progressively brought him to a place of better understanding.
yeah, that's true. Let's read verse 5.
And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came.
Yeah. So he had gathered substance while he was in Haran. Important to note, he took his wife with him, his brother's son Lot, and they went towards Canaan. Hebrews 11, go figure, talks about this. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out to a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob and their heirs with him of the same promise. So God already took that to be a sign of faith that he was willing to get up and go. So even though he doesn't tell him that, he will credit his faith for righteousness for another 3 chapters, God has already noted his faith. Verse 6.
And Abram passed through the land into the place of Shechem, to the plain of Morah, and the Canaanites was in the land.
All right. So this place is also written out as Shechem. This is a really interesting place. There's actually a lot of things that happen here. I picked 4 of them to pull out. There were at least 7. But this is where Jacob will later build an altar to the Lord and called it El Ohe Israel in Genesis 33:20. The place I pulled some of this information from did not use the King James, so if it sounds different than what you're used to reading, that might be why. This established the connection between Jacob and what became known as Jacob's Well. Now, where in the world do we hear about Jacob's Well? The Samaritan woman. Man, it's a good thing we just heard that story the other day. This also happens to be where Joseph's bones were brought when they finally made their way into the land. For my people in our LBI classes, we taught on Joshua this week. And go figure, Joseph was buried at Shechem. He was carried up from Egypt there. This is where Joshua made a covenant with Israel, renewing their commitment to the God of Israel, proclaiming that for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And then finally, in the New Testament, this place is also called Sychar, and as you guys mentioned, this is where Jacob's well was. This fits in line with the story of the Samaritan woman. So God definitely had a plan for these specific places all the way back when the patriarchs stopped there.
Do you know what the modern day name for that is?
I do not. I don't. Sorry. I'll look into it. Verse 7.
And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there build he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him.
Yeah. So God at this point told him, this is the land you are going to receive. You've gone without knowing where you were going. This is where you're going to be. Great. Very exciting. He's got some answers, even if just a little bit. But verse 8, we continue.
And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east, and there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and came upon the name of the Lord.
Yeah. So this is the same description of Ai in Joshua chapter 7. It's to the east of Bethel. This is the country that they greatly lost a battle to when the people were coming in to take the land because Achan had taken of the accursed thing. And they thought this would be no big deal, but it becomes a much bigger deal as the time progresses. But it just so happens this also is where Abram is there, and he pitched his tent there. He stayed there for a while. He built an altar to the Lord. So imagine how these things can change over time. You see here it's called Hai. It's Ai, Hai. I mean, sometimes there are small letter changes over time. It's the same place, same topic being talked about, but it may be written in a slightly different way. You can also think from Old Testament to New Testament, Isaiah is written differently, but we know it's Isaiah. Now, granted, you wouldn't have a language change there, but you would have had, hundreds of years between the difference between Joshua and Abram. So you still have some of those small minor changes. All right, next.
And Abram journeyed going on still toward the south.
And go ahead and read the next verse.
And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land.
Yeah. So, do you think that was on accident? No. I like that. No such thing. God controls the weather. If there's a famine in the land, it was probably on purpose. Deuteronomy 11:11 through 14 had something really interesting to say about this. It says, "But the land whither you go to possess it. It is a land of hills and valleys that drinketh water of the rain from heaven. So God says he specifically made that place to be somewhere that receives a good bit of rain. A land where the Lord thy God careth for, and the eyes of the Lord thy God are always upon it. From the beginning of the year even unto the end of the year, and it shall come to pass, if you will hearken diligently unto my command, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, to serve him with all your heart and your soul, that I will give you the rain in your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn, thy wine, and thine oil. So God said, hey, I not only am in control of the weather, but I watched this place specifically. This is a special area to me. And so it's interesting that there's a famine in the land, because one, that may show the dearth of the people, that they are not living in a way that God has approved of. But second, it may be God's way of moving Abram down to do different things. All right, so verse 11.
And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon.
All right, it's always a good idea to tell your wife she's pretty.
What is not a good idea?
We're coming to the bad idea next. All right, verse 12.
Better if you shouldn't tell her she's not.
All right, verse 12.
Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive.
Now, it is not a good idea to try to tell your wife she should pretend to be your sister. Don't do that. Now, I will have to clarify, and I don't remember if it happened. I think it's under him, but he makes the statement later, maybe in the next chapter or so, where he's like, well, technically she is my half-sister. So, I mean, it's not 100% not true, but it was deceptive. It was deceptive. It was a lie he was trying to lie.
Yeah.
All right. It was a bad decision. Verse 13. Verse 13. Go ahead.
Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well for me, for thy sake, for my soul shall live because of thee.
Now, Sarah complies. Sarah and Abram ask each other sometimes to do some not smart things. And, God still blesses Sarah and Abraham, but it causes them some headache along the way. Suzanne, keep going.
Okay, are we on 12?
14.
14, oh my goodness. Okay. And it came to pass, when Abram was come up into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman that she was very fair.
All right, so he was right. She is pretty. She's also a 65-year-old woman. So she apparently maintained her beauty very well.
Right.
Hey, hold on. I'm not saying that other people that don't do that.
I heard a butt in there.
There was no but.
Too late, Alex. She was pretty, but.
No.
Stop, Alex.
All right. Well, hold on. I gotta put my shovel down. Anyway. I gotta put my shovel down. The point was, if you just listen to the story and you don't pay attention to the ages previously, you'd think, wow, she's probably some very young woman. Like, she's not. She's 65 years old. I do. I'm sorry. There's something about beating a dead horse, and I haven't figured out how to stop doing it.
Verse 15 is how you get out of it.
Verse 15. You got it. And you're up to read, by the way.
Was that common? Why would he think they would kill him? Did they do that? If they saw a woman and she was married and they wanted it, did they
David
kill
did.
them?
I mean, this is one of those scenarios. I think he understands he's going somewhere. He's not known. He's a stranger. They have no respect for him.
Well, I was gonna say Egyptians too, they were pretty rough people, weren't they?
Anyway, so he's coming into a land where he's a stranger. He has no one to kind of take his side, and the only thing he's thinking is,
God told me to come.
you know, I'm going to be in trouble. And so, unfortunately, he's looking at his own ability. He's looking at his own ability to protect himself and do these things instead of looking at God said he would make him a great nation. And so these are some of the moments where you see a lack of faith on the side of Abram and Sarah. You see the same thing from Sarah, not in the call you my sister thing, but in the, hey, take Hagar, my servant thing. So they both have their faults. And this is kind of one of those more beautiful passages because we don't have these completely unrealistic people in the Bible. We have people who made really boneheaded mistakes like we do. Like they keep picking up shovels and stuff. Anyway.
I just think of David and Bathsheba and Uriah.
Yeah.
He set up Uriah to get killed so he could have his wife.
Well,
I mean, it's.
that was more so he didn't have to deal with the fact that he had a child with someone else's wife. I don't think initially his intention was to marry her. I think he couldn't get Uriah to do what he wanted, and he's like, now I have to. Which it ends up working out. Bathsheba, although their child dies, does end up becoming the mom of Solomon. So I mean, there are still those moments where God blesses even terrible mistakes that we make, just not in the moment. Verse 15. I tried. It keeps.
The princesses also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh. And that woman was taken into Pharaoh's house.
She must have really been something.
Yeah. You know, that's something else we need to talk about. Is beauty objective or subjective?
Oh, it's subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder.
Is it? Because if God says something's beautiful, isn't that an objective truth?
Yes.
There are specific people and specific times in the Bible God says they were beautiful or fair, or when it talks about David, it talks about David being a good-looking guy.
Joseph too.
So I think to some level there is a level of objectivity. Now we have subjective reins on that. There may be preferences within us, but there seems to also be an objective standard of beauty. And I think by us just telling ourselves beauty is subjective, because that's what we've heard, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, sometimes we negate a little bit of that. As a matter of fact, Tyler, you may remember this, in one of the books we were reading, there was a gentleman who wrote an entire book talking about the degradation of society because a textbook said something along the lines of a waterfall in this specific place was not objectively beautiful. They made a point that it was just subjective. And he went through and wrote an entire book about how the whole civilization is on a decline because we're turning things relative instead of looking at things in an objective stance, which I thought was really interesting. I can't remember the name of the book right now. I don't know if you remember. No? All right. I tried to include you on that one. I'm sorry. It came from the classical education book.
Okay, it's been a little while.
It has. Yeah. So I'll figure that out and maybe someday remember to tell you. Probably not.
Or put it on the
I
pop
don't know
quiz.
about the book.
Huh?
Put it on the pop quiz.
There you go. Putting it on the pop quiz. All right.
Yeah, I don't know about the book, but that's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
That's why we've gotten where we're at. We've got so far away from God that everything is subjective.
Yeah, we're losing every form of objective standard.
Objective, nothing.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, it's just interesting that God says she's beautiful, but he doesn't give a description of what that is.
Right.
And that's the part that is subjective, is what the standards of beauty are in a particular culture. what a Chinese culture in a comparable period to Abraham thought was beauty might be different, might
Right.
be considerably different. So it's interesting that God says, yes, there is an objective standard, but I'm not gonna tell you what it is.
Yep. Good luck. All right.
Figure it out for yourself.
And he entreated Abram well for his sake, and he hath sheep and oxen and he asses, and men servants and maid servants and she asses and camels.
All right. Abram was essentially paid a dowry for Sarai. That's what this is. They're saying, hey, you're the possessor of your sister at this point, essentially, is what this is. Here's this substance. This is for her, now that I've taken her. This would have been quite a pricey one, so they felt like she was worth a good bit. Abram receives a great mass of wealth then from Pharaoh. And I think God did that on purpose, even though it's in lieu of one of their moments of faithlessness. I think this is one of those moments where God is working in this scenario for sure. Verse 17.
And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife.
You know, I figured Egypt would know something about God. They get plagued a couple times. They seem to keep forgetting along the way. Yeah, kind of like the Israelites and us. Yeah, so.
But Abram's lied. How did the Pharaoh know? I mean, he only knew what they told him.
Read the top of the next page.
Why did God do this?
Yeah,
That was my question.
exactly. Short answer, I don't know. Because God is wiser than I am. And I think you can see it playing out a little bit later. So part of how God separates Abram from Lot is because of their mass amounts of substance. And so along the way, God has a couple of these stories that happen. I think the next one happens with Abimelech. And you have these scenarios where they're given this great substance to the point where they now have so much they can't be around each other. And so I think this is God slowly moving Abram to the right direction, even though he's failing and flailing along the way.
I think it's a little bit of, how often do we try to get ahead of God? And that's what Abram was doing. He was trying to get ahead of God and
Yeah. Well, and
not waiting.
believe me, the Bible is full of stories that do that. Let's look at Moses. Let's kill the Egyptians. Oh, snap, that didn't go well. I'm going to go hide for 40 years. Hey, it's time to go get the Egyptians. I can't do it. Well, you tried 40 years ago. Buck up, dude. Anyway, I also think Abraham was in the wrong for this. But that's not my call. So, verse 18.
And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done with me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife?
See, he gets it. Somehow Pharaoh knew that this was because of Sarai. I don't know if he gets a dream like Abimelech does later, or how God communicates that, but somehow he knows. Maybe that was just the only common denominator. She came in my house, plagues, problems. All right. Now Pharaoh understands then the importance. Pharaoh understands then the importance of marriage fidelity. Look at that. He knows. He's like, why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Like, they have an understanding that marriage is important, that it should not be superseded in that manner. Like, even without the law, they know, like, adultery is wrong. Like, you don't take another man's wife. This just shows that even prior to the law and after the flood, they recognized the sacredness of marriage. It shows a little bit, pieces of the law written on their hearts, regardless of how many people skew that and decide not to follow it. It seems to be there. Verse 19.
Why saidst thou, she is my sister, so I might have taken her to be to wife? Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way.
Get out.
Get out of here.
Out.
Verse 20.
Do not pass go.
But he collected the $200. Sorry, go ahead.
He won the lottery.
So God allowed Abraham to keep the dowry. Abram ended up being sent away richer than when he came. This is semi-funny regarding his actions of being made rich, because he doesn't want to be made rich by wicked people when it comes to Sodom, but he's willing to be rich based off his own lie. I don't know where his moral compass kicked in there, but it apparently did. Yeah.
This might have been that this, that God continually reminded of him of this, and he was continually embarrassed over it. You know how we, I don't know if I'm the only one that does it, how we rehearse dumb things that we've said and done over the course of our lives.
Yep.
Isn't that how God oftentimes works with us?
Yeah.
He just keeps reminding us of the stupid stuff we've done, and we say, gee, I don't think I'll do that again. I think I'll try to avoid that.
Well, the problem is he does it again the next chapter. But after that, maybe he got the message. Anyway, it worked the first time. What could possibly go wrong? And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him. We talked about that. God did not allow Abraham to stay in the land. Noted that. He's not in his land anymore. He's in Egypt. And so God forces him up out of Egypt. God's making him go back to where he wants him to be. And I think this is all God providentially moving Abram to be the man in the place where he needs to be. It's a beautiful thing. All right, so that's Genesis chapter 12. Next week we hit 13. You might hear some similar themes.
By the way, Sychor was Samaria,
Yeah.
Oh, good.
and Samaria is now Palestine.
Huh. But Palestine's the name of a general area, right? Is there a city there still?
It didn't say,
Okay.
Pastor Google didn't say.
All right.